Welcome, everyone. I'm Robin Gofine, the Executive Director of the National Council of Jewish Women of Canada, Toronto section. Today, I am speaking on behalf of a collective of Jewish women's organization located in Toronto and across the country who've come together to create a collective voice and host programs on important issues that impact all of us. These organizations are the National Council of Jewish Women of Canada, the National Council of Jewish Women of Canada Toronto section, Canadian Hadassah Witzo, Na'amat Canada, Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism, Momentum Canada, and Women of Holy Blossom. As we approach this year's International Women's Day, we are proud to be hosting a conversation today between two incredibly talented women. TV personality, fashion editor and icon, trailblazer and author Jeanne Beker, and talented radio broadcaster and musician Talia Schlanger. Each of these women continue to enrich all of us with their writing and their music. Jeanne, as a 6-time author, most recently of her book, Heart on My Sleeve, and her TV show, Style Matters, will be returning on the Shopping Channel this coming Thursday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. And that can be seen on tsc.ca if you want to watch it live. And Talia, through her extraordinary interviews on CBC and NPR, as well as through her newly released album, Grace for the Going. Welcome, Jeanne and Talia. Thank you for joining us today. And to our audience, please enjoy this conversation.
Thank you, Robin. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jeanne.
Hi, how are you? This is fun. We're doing it like from the comfort of our own homes, and I guess all you guys out there are in the comfort of your own homes, so it's going to be a cozy chat.
Exactly. And a happy early International Women's Day. It's on Saturday, so we're warming up to the big day. And what an honor to get to take part in this collaboration between 5 amazing organizations and to get to talk to you, Jeanne. So thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, I just have to say, you are off the map talented. You're just crazy talented. I listen to your music and I'm just like blown away. I mean, I know you're a great interviewer, but you're just such a great musician too. So kudos.
Thank you. Everybody's going to watch me tear up and cry before we've even started the interview, Jeanne. As a longtime fan of yours and admirer, that means so much to me. So thank you very much. Thank you. So the theme today is resilience and rising to our challenges. And I wanted to sort of dive right in there and ask off the top, Jeanne, when you hear that word, when you hear the word resilience, what does it make you think of first?
My parents, plain and simple, my parents, 2 incredibly resilient Holocaust survivors who, went through the war and incredible horrors and managed to rise like phoenixes from the ashes when they immigrated to Canada in 1948 and somehow managed to find light in all the darkness. So with those 2 role models, wow, I was set. They have given me incredible inspiration throughout my life, each and every day.
I want to dive a bit more into their story because it was so formative for you, and because you chose to start your latest memoir, Heart on My Sleeve, with a story inspired by them. And in this memoir, you're tracing your life through garments and items from your closet that have come to mean a lot to you over time. And the first one that you write about is this brown satchel that was your mom's. So would you tell us about that brown satchel?
Well, my parents, as I said, were Holocaust survivors. They were from a small shtetl in eastern Poland, which is now part of Ukraine, a little shtetl called Kozowa. And they were young lovers. My dad was a few years older than my mom, and he went off to the Polish army. And my mom was, at home with her family. And my grandfather had a bunker in the basement of their home. And when the Nazis would come, regularly to search for Jews and round them up and just kill them, my mom and 9 of her family members hid in this underground bunker. And one day when the Nazis came, they were really rifling around the place, and they must have suspected that maybe there was someone hiding somewhere in the house. And there were these air pipes that allowed my mom and her family members to breathe. But they stuffed up the air pipes and then they left the house. And every single member of my mom's family perished, except my mom was the sole survivor. And it was just an absolute miracle. Of course, when she really was revived and realized what happened and that she had lost everyone, she just wanted to, do herself in. It was just a nightmare. But then my dad at that same time deserted the Polish army because he figured, well, they're going to find out who he is and they're going to kill him anyway. So he came back to the shtetl and found my mother. And together, the two of them embarked on this crazy run the entire time. I mean, thank God they were never in a concentration camp, but they were on the run the entire time, in depending on the kindness of strangers, in bunkers, in attics, in barns. At one point, they spent months literally in a hole in the ground. I mean, these are the stories I grew up on, of course. But anyway, when my mom and dad finally, were free of the running, when the war ended in 1945, they moved to Austria to a displaced person camp where they awaited their opportunity to come to the States, or at least to Canada. And my mom met some people from, her small shtetl that had also survived. And these people managed to have these old photographs of some of my family members, photographs of some of these wonderful people that had been in my mom's life that she had lost forever. And my mom collected all these wonderful photographs, and she stashed them in this old brown worn leather satchel. And this precious piece was one of the few things that she had with her when she came to Canada in 1948. They landed at Pier 21 in Halifax. And this brown leather satchel had a place in the back of my mom's closet. So as a little child, that was really the first, let's call it an accessory, that I really related to, that I thought had a real gravitas to it, that seemed so all important because it held these incredible pictures. And I would sit on the floor of my mom's closet and regularly pore over these pictures and see all these incredible people that I never had a chance to meet, thinking, maybe I wasn't so different than other kids. Once upon a time, I did have grandparents and I did have cousins and aunts and uncles like other people. But anyway, so that's the story of the brown leather satchel and the precious photographs. But by the time like the 60s rolled around, and it became very popular to put these photos in photo albums. So my mom discarded the brown leather satchel, and now we have a stack of family photo albums of displaying these pictures that are all still so incredibly precious to me.
The story is incredible, and I can't imagine what it'd be like to take that in as a kid. I mean, folks who are first generation survivors have that in common with you. But what was that like to wrap your head around that when you're small?
You know, some people, most people, I think, probably are reluctant to revisit these horrific experiences. And a lot of Holocaust survivors would never want to talk about their experiences. But my parents, perhaps as a form of therapy, I mean, in those days, it wasn't, the chic thing to do to go to a therapist. You just talk, with your friends and family members. And we didn't have many family members. It was just like me and my sister. So my parents would incessantly recount these stories. And, I think I can't even tell you how many times, at dinner tables, I'd be sitting there listening to these stories. I remember as like a 4 or 5 year old, I hid under the bed because I did not want to hear any more war stories. But now I realize it's these stories that really made me who I am and gave me the strength and the courage and the faith, and perhaps even the resilience that they had demonstrated so incredibly well.
Your father had a motto. What was it?
Don't be afraid and never give up. And that, don't, listen, if you're fearless and you're tenacious, you can do just about anything, right? So that was a great motto that got me through all kinds of situations and continues to get me through all kinds of situations. I mean, certainly, yeah, it just totally fueled all my aspirations, and I always thought to myself, if I was fearless and I was tenacious, I could get through anything. I mean, years later in the trenches of fashion, I'd be running after Karl Lagerfeld with my microphone, like, 50 other crews running after him for a 2-minute soundbite. And I'd be, like thinking, don't be afraid and never give up. Don't be afraid and never give up, and there I was, at the front of the line, shoving my microphone into Karl's face and getting the goods. So yeah, an incredible motto that served me so well. During my marriage breakup, which was a devastating time for me personally, of course, just through my cancer journey, in all kinds of ways, it has served me so well.
We're going to dig into some of those in a little bit, but before we move on from sort of the early inspiration in fashion, my father's parents also survived the Holocaust, and the few photos that remain from the pre-war time and from their early life in Canada too. What always struck me about those photos is they had nothing, but they looked incredible.
Yeah.
There was a real sense of occasion about the way that they presented themselves to the world. And I can't help but think that that has something to do with their being Jewish and for their being part of this group where they were persecuted, they were made to feel outside, and it was so important to them to look good. And I know that your dad also taught you that people will judge you based on the way that you dress. And I'm wondering if you think that that has anything to do with what he and your mom went through.
I know, that's interesting. I never, thought of it as, a part of their Jewishness, but I certainly did think that they looked like movie stars, even living in the displaced person camp, and even in some of the old pictures, pre-war pictures that I've seen of them. But I think it's just a great sense of pride in oneself,
Mhm.
and I think that maybe is really at the core of all of us who are Jewish. A great sense of pride. So perhaps that was it. Yeah, but they had an incredible style sense. It seemed, and surprising that they somehow had access to these pieces. Where they got them, because it certainly wasn't like they were, spending money on them, and they didn't have the money to spend. But somehow they would find just the right things and put them together in just the right way. I do find though that Eastern European women in particular have an amazing sense of style. It's just an inherent thing.
Totally. My bubba used to call it a tum, which is meant like in Yiddish, like the flavor, like
Yeah,
your tum.
taste.
You would do that.
Exactly.
To taste, exactly, exactly. So, and you've said that you knew that you always wanted to be famous, or that you always knew you wanted to be famous.
Oh, I feel
What?
so shallow.
No.
I've been exposed. It's
What's your
true.
like?
Listen, I was a child of the 50s and 60s, but I grew up with a TV set. And boy, did I worship like Lucille Ball and Captain Kangaroo and, all these things, everyone that I ever saw on Ed Sullivan, Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and all I would wish for every year on my birthday cake was to have my own TV show. That's what I wanted to do, and I think I was very adamant about being a storyteller, because my dad was both my parents were great storytellers. And, my dad in particular, I think, in a way taught me the art of storytelling and the importance of communicating in that way. In 1952, the year I was born, my parents had scrimped and saved. They were both working at factories, and they managed to put a down payment on a 3-story house in downtown Toronto. But of course, they could never even dream of like paying that mortgage on their own. But what they did is they rented out all the rooms in the house except for 2 downstairs, where they and, my sister and I lived in these two little rooms, and all the different rooms in the house were rented out to different immigrants and immigrant families. And every night my dad would invite them downstairs for a little shot of Crown Royal. And he would ask them about the story of their lives, and they were all speaking in broken English, of course, but somehow they managed to communicate with each other. And, that was another thing, I would sit there in wide-eyed wonder, listening to all these incredible stories and thinking, what a great thing when you can tell and I always thought that was the most precious thing we could give one another, our own personal stories. And I think that made me want to be a journalist, a storyteller, just to connect with people and try to touch them in that way.
Can you give us a sense of how you forged your path in the early days of breaking through to be that storyteller and that TV host that you dreamed of being?
Well, I thought, for me, I wanted to be an actress. That was the thing. That was the most glamorous thing I could imagine. And I definitely wanted to do that. My mom was so wonderful, really indulged me in all these incredible lessons. I had ballet lessons and guitar lessons and piano lessons and drama lessons. And so, starting at the age of 12, I started really taking that seriously. I wanted to be an actress. By the time I was 16, I actually got a role in a CBC sitcom, like a recurring role, which was like incredible. I can't believe, that I even went to this big open audition that my dear late great friend Marcia Rocket Beker, and people may know her. She was my bestie back in the day, and she would encourage me to go to this audition. I hear there's open auditions. You'd be great. You go to. And I walked in, I didn't know what I was doing, but I did an audition and wow, I got the role. And then I got an agent and a union card, and I started, I did little bits and pieces and commercials and all that stuff. And that was great. And then by the time I was 19, I went off to New York City to study acting at the Herbert Berghoff studio, which was very hard for my mom to let me go. She sewed $500 into the $500 that I had made working, at a summer camp, teaching theater the summer before. She sewed $500 into my panties. There's a story about that in the book, which was because that's when she first went to the big city, Tarnopol. In the old, her mother sewed money into her panties and, said, they'll never find it there, and I'm thinking, Mom, that's probably the first place they're going to look. So I ended up going, sitting on a Greyhound bus on my $500 in the panties. And I went to New York, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know if somehow the angels were watching over me, I guess, but I managed to make my way there, and it was incredible. And I was there for, maybe a little under a year studying. And then I came back and studied theater at university, because I thought, no, but I really should be studying at university to get a real, solid education in the theater. But then after having studied New York, what I was studying at university seems, not that inspiring. But I heard that there was this guy teaching mime in downtown Toronto, pantomime, like Marcel Marceau, I can still do it.
That was very good. Yeah.
Oh, you should see me go. And I thought, well, this would be a good thing to do in addition to my university studies at York University. I'm going to go and study with this guy. And I studied mime, and he said, you're really good. You have a knack for this, because I was always, a bit of a dancer, and I loved the idea of corporal expression. He said, you should go to Paris and study with the same guy that I studied with, who was the old man that taught Marcel Marceau, father of modern mime, Etienne de Cruz. So in 1973, I took off for Paris, and I studied with this old man who gave classes in his basement in the Bois de Boulogne, in this little house. I mean, it was an incredible time, to be 21 years old and be living in Paris. And, it was just an absolute fantasy for me. And I did that for like about a year. And then I thought, no, I should really go back to university. And I was kind of in love with this guy that I was seeing back in Toronto. And anyway, came back to Toronto and enrolled back in university. And then the guy I was with, got a fellowship to study folklore at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. And he said, well, let's run away to Newfoundland together. And it was like, really? Uh, mm, okay. All right, let's do it. My mother never even heard of Newfoundland back in those days. It was like, where are you going? But we ended up moving to Newfoundland, and I got a job at CBC Radio. I was the only mime artist in the province, and I get a job in radio. Go figure. So anyway, it was that whole, don't be afraid and never give up. I had a lot of chutzpah for even knocking on the door of CBC Radio, but I tried to, pitch myself as an arts reporter because I thought there's a great lively artistic scene going on here and no one's really reporting on it. So I did that for 3 years, and then we moved back to Toronto, and I had all this experience, and I landed a job with Chum Radio in 1978, and that was the year that Chum Radio bought this funky little cable TV station, City TV. So I got hired at Chum Radio as their good news girl. And all of a sudden, I had my own little gig. I did 17 of these reports, 17 a week. And they were all, lifestyle related, arts and lifestyle. And then they had an idea to do a music show on TV and cross promote some of these radio people into TV. So they chose me and this boss jock, JD Roberts, who is now John Roberts of Fox News.
Oh.
Yikes. Yeah. And JD and I hosted a show called The New Music starting in 1979. And this is pre-MTV. Like, I really got a great chance to do trailblazing, you got to say, because boy, no one was putting rock stars on TV in that way. We did that show and then founded Much Music together. And then in 1985, I thought, okay, if I have to interview Rod Stewart once more, I'm going to lose it. This is getting tired. What's the next big thing? And I thought, fashion. Where are the egos is fabulous. Where's the theater? Where's the drama is great. Anywhere in the world that in the fashion scenes. I thought that called to me, and I started doing fashion television in 1985 and did that show for 27 years. So the story of my life, and that's how it all happened.
It's unbelievable, and to tell it now, it rolls right off your tongue. But I imagine that there were many challenges that you had to rise to along the way, especially as a woman at that time in that industry. So can you give us a bit of insight into some of the resilience in that respect?
Well, I mean, just for the credibility, and because I was doing something that no one had really done before, and because I was sort of, this, cute little chick that wore the sexy clothes and stuff, people just thought, oh, she just must be some kind of groupie. And so many people were jealous, I guess, or thought, what business does she have interviewing these, great legendary rock stars? Like what does she know? And I didn't really pretend to know anything. I mean, I was a fan. And I think that's probably why the show worked. But to your point of, how hard was it for a woman to prove myself, yeah, it was hard. And I hate to say it, but we accepted a lot of BS. We accepted a lot of horribleness on the part of males and the way they treated us, and especially in that, loosey-goosey, laissez-faire world of rock and roll where, guys would be coming on to me every 5 seconds, and it was like, how do I get out of this one? So it was a constant, yeah, exactly. A constant kind of a battle, but, I took it in stride because that was the zeitgeist, that really was that was what it was like at the time. Young women today would never have tolerated it, just absolutely horrible. And then fast forward, to all those years later, and by 1985, we launched fashion television. The show took off like wildfire. It was a great hit. And I thought, okay, my mother's saying, no, when are you going to have kids? Like, I was 35 years old. She goes, because the store's going to close. You got to have kids, okay, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, all right, I'll I'll get pregnant. I'll have, I was married, of course, and let's have kids. So I got pregnant, and when I was about, and worked all the way through, it was like 8.5 months pregnant. And Moses Neimer, who was the brilliant media visionary, who knew how to press all my buttons. He was the head of City TV, of course. He was the one that really masterminded so much of the great work that I was able to do in my career in those early days. He came into me up to me one day when I was in the makeup room, and he said, "So, when are you coming back to work after you have this baby of yours?" And I thought, well, Moses, I hadn't really thought of it yet. Like, now, in those days, you could only take 3 months mat leave. And yes, they had to give you a job when you came back, but it didn't have to be the same job. They could give you some other job, not like today where they have to give you the same job and you can take a year. And I said, well, Moses, I don't know. He says, well, because there's a lineup of 20-something-year-old girls outside my office door, all waiting for your job. And if you don't come back, I might have to give it to them. And it's like, Moses, I'll be back right away, because that show, I had worked so hard.
Yeah.
And I wanted that so much. And I was, kind of living the dream. I thought, Moses, don't worry, I'll be back right away. And I went back to work 2.5 weeks after my first child. And I did the same thing 2 years later when I had my second daughter. So
How did you do that? Sorry, how did you do
how did I do that? My mom, bless her, was still alive at the time. With my first child, my dad was still, thank God my dad did live to see my first daughter born. He passed when she was about 8 or 9 months old, but at least he lived to see a granddaughter. My mom was there for me. I had a nanny. I had a husband. It was, somehow we made it work. Somehow we made it work. But I was fearless and I was tenacious about it. And yes, of course, yes, were my babies my priorities? Absolutely. But I had to be true to myself. I couldn't give that up. I just had worked too hard. I knew it was who I was. I couldn't shortchange myself, because I knew my kids would suffer for it if I did, because they would be with a mother that wasn't totally fulfilled and wasn't totally happy. And somehow it worked. Somehow, I cried myself to sleep in hotel rooms all around the world for countless nights, as you can imagine, as any working mother out there can relate to that, I'm sure. But it was important for me to keep my career going. And I seriously don't believe that I could have achieved the kind of success that I achieved if I would have taken that big chunk of time off, if I would have taken a year off. That world just moved too quickly. I had to be true to myself.
Sometimes we talk about the challenges and difficulties of being a woman in the workforce, and we forget to talk about the other side of the coin. So I always like to ask, like, what's something that was easier or more fabulous or more wonderful because you were a woman in your career?
What was something that, how did being a woman serve me in my life?
Yes, yeah. What is, we talk about some
Well,
disadvantages. What was an advantage?
Well, I mean, I could be charming and schmooze people and get, in the business I was in, it was all about getting a good interview and getting a great, soundbite, especially in the days of doing the rock and roll scene, and, sort of kind of, I don't want to say sucking up to these guys, but, just being a little, charming, so they would open up a little bit more. And I ended up having great relationships, seriously relationships. And I don't mean anything sleazy about it. This is not like I never, went to bed with these people. Trust me, no, as much as people may have thought I would have. but no, it was, people like geniuses like Frank Zappa. I had an incredible relationship with him. He became this avuncular character in my life. Seriously, he would just give me career advice, because he came to Toronto several times over the years. And there's a great documentary about him on one of the streaming services called Eat That Question. And my interview with him is the one that's primarily used throughout one of the major interviews I had done with him throughout the whole show, because he never really, opened up to others, and he could be very hard to talk to and very mean to some journalists. But for some reason, I had a great relationship with him. So I guess it's those charms, that did it for me. But I was constantly aware that I probably wasn't getting paid as much as my male counterparts, and that I wasn't, maybe I didn't have the credibility that some of them did. I had to work, extra hard for that. But I don't know, the fact that I could cry in front of people, which I still do sometimes when I feel like it. I don't go for this thing like you should never cry. You got to be tough if you're a woman trying to make it in business. Like I broke down like lots of times, certainly in front of Moses. He made me cry all the time, and he may have looked down his nose at it, but it didn't matter to me. I was in touch with my emotions. I could be who I wanted to be because not because I was a woman, but maybe just because of who I was. So yeah, I mean, I think there's something about being a woman that enables us to be tough, but also always be in touch with our softer side. And I think that's important, because I think that's what makes us great communicators, often maybe better communicators, more in touch with our feelings and more in touch with the feelings of others.
Yeah. I can't get past that Frank Zappa gave you advice, and so I have to ask what it is because he's such a
Oh, I don't think you know what? I'll tell you later, Talia.
okay, okay,
I
okay.
didn't hear it,
Sorry,
so
everyone.
it was shocking. It was great. I don't know. I don't know if I should say it. It's a little. It was a little risque, but it had something to do with the fact that I wanted to go to LA at the time. I thought that's the place for me, and if I really want to make it, take my career to the next level, I'm going to LA. And he's basically told me, honey, if you go to LA, you're going to
Fill in
end
the
up
blank.
selling
Got
your soul. So, but I'll tell you what the advice was later.
it. Okay. Okay, fair enough. That's the exclusive after party. Sorry, everybody. So you had some unbelievable achievements with fashion television, and I think one of the highlights, if I can say that, or you can tell me, was when you were invited to go to Poland because fashion television was sold to Polish television. What happened there?
Well, I mean, that was a real fantasy for my mom, who had always wanted to go back to her little shtetl, to go back to Kosovo, which by that time had become Ukraine. But still, my sister and I, probably because we grew up with so many of these war stories, we couldn't bring ourselves to it. We just didn't want to do it. And we also felt, because we had heard from friends of my parents that had gone back to revisit their old shtetls. One friend told my mom that the sidewalks had been paved with the gravestones from the Jewish cemetery. And I thought, if my mom saw that, like, it would just be devastating. And my mom had such an idyllic, because she had such a happy life in pre-war Poland, such a happy life. She had so many fond memories and told many beautiful stories. I mean, my parents' stories, actually, their memoir was published by the Azraeli Foundation in 2014. It's a book called Joy Runs Deeper. And you can see, my mom's stories in there of pre-war Poland and the idyllic life that she led before everything just exploded. So we were reluctant to ever take her there. But all of a sudden, I find out that our show's being sold to Polish TV, and it had already been aired there illegally for a few years. So I was kind of a little bit of a celebrity there already. And they invited us to come to Poland and have a big press conference. And, my producer and I went, and I thought, let's take my mom. She'll act as our translator. Wouldn't that be great? And for my mom, it was like, oi, it was fantastic. They put us up at the most beautiful of the Bristol Hotel there in Warsaw. It was just incredible. And so the night of the press conference, my mother was like so proud and so pumped. And there I was just speaking to quite a room filled with Polish journalists. and, told them, this is a real homecoming for my mom. And I've brought my mom with me. She hasn't been back since the war. And isn't this wonderful that, she survived the Holocaust and is here to revisit Poland. And all of a sudden, nobody wanted to talk to me anymore. Nobody cared. They all turned toward my mother, this little lady sitting at the back of the room, and started asking her questions. And my mom, unbeknownst to me, had written a little speech that she kept in her purse. She opened her purse and took out the speech, and she started, delivering the speech in the most beautiful Polish. I mean, my mother spoke so beautifully. She was so eloquent. And she became the big star of the show. And she was featured on the 6 o'clock news that night. It was a real thrill for her. So that was wonderful. That was an incredible. Oh, I just haven't really thought about it in a while, about that particular experience with my mom. It was one of the best, as you could totally imagine. It was incredible.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine how powerful it was for her. What's making you emotional right now as you're thinking about it?
I just think about my mom and how
Yeah.
great she was.
Yeah. What's her name? We haven't said her name yet.
Her name is Beker, very active member of Hadassah for many, many years. And yeah, I used to have great joy going to the Hadassah Bazaar with her. God, we missed that Hadassah Bazaar every year. And she would, was working for that organization in such a diligent way. Yeah, my mom was a force. Amazing, amazing woman. I think anyone who knew her would attest to that. So very, very proud. And I'm certainly, I would hope to be, my mom's daughter, my dad's daughter too. My dad was incredible as well, but there's a bond with mothers and daughters that's pretty intense.
Yeah, big time. I can only imagine how proud she would have been of you and to see your children as well, to have grandchildren.
Oh, yeah. Well, my mom, thankfully, my kids did grow up with a grandmother. Unlike me, I never had grandparents, but my kids learned so much from my mom, like actually my daughter Joey, who lives in the Yukon now, off grid in a little log cabin. Boy, that's a whole other story. She's great. She's a singer-songwriter, Joey O'Neill. She's brilliant. She's been studying Yiddish on Duolingo for the past couple of years, which is really cool, I think. And every once in a while, I have a little bit of a Yiddish conversation with her because she's picked up. She was just always charmed by my mom, and my mom taught her how to crochet. And Joey is like a master craftswoman now. My mom was the most incredible craftswoman. I mean, she crocheted bedspreads and evening gowns and everything, made all our own clothes and everything. So, my kids and my daughter, Becky, as well, was just so inspired by my mom. It was just a joy to see that, to see that the kind of bond that those girls had with my mom, and how proud she was of them. And in her later years too, I was always so worried about, certainly Joey. We would have I always had a Passover seders or Rosh Hashanah dinners at my house, and we would Zoom Joey in, because Joey's lived in the Yukon for over a decade now. And my mom died. Yeah, just really before my mom died. Um, is when Joey moved out to the Yukon, but there was like about a couple of years in there before she passed that we had Joey in the Yukon, and I was tearing my hair out, like just so worried about it. And my mom would just always be saying to Joey over Zoom, even at the Seder table. I remember one year she'd see Joey, in her little cabin trying to have her version of a Seder. And she goes, but are you happy? But are you She just wanted to know if Joey was happy. And Joey went, yeah, Bub. They called her Bubba. Yeah, Bubba, I'm happy. I'm really happy. And my mom goes, oi, okay. So that's good as long as you're happy. And it was like, what? How could that, my mom taught me that, that's really essentially the most important thing. As long as the kids are happy, the kids will be okay. So yeah, gleaned a lot from my mom in that way.
I'm so grateful to you for talking about her so openly because I think it feels, I'm picturing just, we can't see the faces of everybody who's tuned in right now, but I'm sure that you've made every single one of us think about someone in our lives that we hold dear in that way. So I thank you for that. So beautiful. Um, while you brought up Yiddish and Duolingo, I have to ask Jeannie Beker, do you have a favorite Yiddish expression?
Ah, um, yeah, okay. This is funny because you said this word earlier when you were talking about your grandmother, I think. My mother used to say certain things like "hat nicht kein Jiddische Tom."
Yes.
They don't
Yeah.
have a Jewishy flavor. And how do you explain that to someone? How do you explain to someone who isn't Jewish, like what that means to have a Jewish flavor? There's just something, and I'm not talking about a flavor of a food or anything, of course, as you know, but "hat nicht kein Jiddische Tom" was one that she used from time to time, and I could really relate to that.
Classic, a classic. Back to your own story, and I'm asking about this. I know we're at like sort of an emotional point, and I feel badly to ask about this at this moment, but I think that a lot of people are going to want to hear about this. A few years ago, your life changed in a very big way when you were diagnosed with breast cancer, and I just wanted to make time to talk about that. First of all, how's your health? How are you doing now?
Well, thank God, I always say, I'm so far so good. Listen, as anyone who's had cancer knows, we cancer survivors live from scan to scan. Sort of you're only as healthy as your last scan. So, that was I had a scan actually in January and an MRI. I have dense breasts, so I have to go for additional screening. It's not enough to just have a mammogram a year if you have dense breasts. You also have to have either an MRI if you can, or at least an ultrasound. So I went for my MRI, and they found a little something, and it was like, oh, here we go again. And it had only been a couple of years, and I got, and of course you start jumping to the worst conclusions. But then, thank God, I went back and for an ultrasound, and the doctor said, you know what? No, it's probably just scar tissue. So it should be fine. It should be good. You'll come for another MRI in June. So I'll go for another MRI in June. And bless that Princess Margaret Cancer Center that just takes such good care of me. I mean, that is my temple of healing. What a brilliant, brilliant place. And how lucky are we to be living at this time in history when we can be checked and we do have access to these screenings and treatments, and when cancer is often not just treatable but curable if detected early. That's such an important thing. So to your question, like, yeah, I'm fine. Did it change me? In myriad ways, absolutely, for the better. Absolutely for the better. And I knew it would. I kind of told myself it would, whether I really believed it in the initial days after my diagnosis. It was like, okay, this is going to make me a better, bigger, stronger, braver, bolder person, and God, it really did. It really did.
Mm.
It made me appreciate my life so much more. Not that I never appreciated my life. I always have, but just every day I wake up, oh, okay, I live to see another one,
Yeah.
It just puts so much into perspective, truly. And also because I shared my story, and I know a lot of people don't want to share their stories about cancer, and I totally understand that. I totally respect that. But for me, I mean, I thought I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't tell everyone that I was going through cancer. I mean, I'm such a public person. My life's an open book. Of course, I had to tell them. The day after I announced it on Instagram, my following doubled, and the notes, the messages of caring and compassion and love that came back to me, and the messages of people telling me their own personal stories, so heart swelling. Truly, all that was the wind beneath my wings when it came to my recovery. I mean, it restored my faith in humanity in a way. So again, just true to what I had grown up believing, the most precious things that we can give one another, our own personal stories. So I was lucky that I, have that story to share, and I will continue to share it. And I get, people from across the country, come up to me and say, wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going through it, or my sister's going through it, or my mother, I got my wife went through it. It's just an incredible feeling that you managed to touch people in that way. It's really one of the things I'm just the proudest of.
Yeah, and you make them feel less alone. You give so much and you also just you're so inspirational to begin with, that for people to know that somebody like you is facing something like this, I think does a lot. And while we're talking about community, I also just want to shout out the National Council of Jewish Women of Canada has this amazing breast cancer support group called L'chaim. And whether it's like psychological counseling or help getting to and from appointments, or finding community, there are all sorts of remarkable things that they do, and I encourage people to check them out, and also to know that they're always very happy to receive anyone's donation to keep doing the amazing things that they do at L'chaim. So there you go. I was going to ask what I'm looking at my notes here. You've just you've given so much. I was going to ask you what you've learned about yourself in this process, but that much is very clear. Something that strikes me about your latest memoir and about all the stories that you've told us really today is that so much of your life has been about finding and making connections with other people. Whether it's really famous people like Paul McCartney or Madonna or Karl Lagerfeld, or not famous people like your parents or like your childhood neighbor, Mrs. Jaskolka, who you write about in your book, and finding a common thread. And I wanted to know if you could reflect on that, because I think in these times when there's so much uncertainty and fear swirling around, I want to know how the idea of finding community and connecting with other people feeds into the idea of your own personal resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I like some of my dearest friends are, the people that I was friends with in high school, or even going back earlier than that, like a junior high school. Like my, my very best friend is someone that I met when I was 11 years old, and I still hold that so near and dear. And I'm just so blessed that I have these connections, or that people sometimes seek me out. Like I've reconnected with a lot of people because they know how to find me, and they and it's like, wow, how great when you reconnect with people from your past. Yeah, it's all about connection and community. My mother, I guess, because my mother's uh, life took on such crazy proportions, when she lost every single member of her family, and she just felt so alone. And thank God my father, came in back into her life and just scooped her up and ran off with her, really swept her away. Um, my mom was always going on and on and on about how it's never good to be alone. It's never good to be alone. And that's something that really, stayed with me, how important it is to have people in your life, whether they're friends, or whether, the things that you can learn from, the people that you connect with on a professional level, and, that's fabulous too. But, no, I just, for me, it's all about people. I mean, that's all about people. That's the only, like, fashion schmashin. Who cares about it's the clothes? It's the people that wear them. It's how they wear them, and it's how they move through the world. I mean, that's what gives people great style. It's not the designer labels and and I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, because, I do love fashion, and I've sold a lot of fashion in my life, and will continue selling fashion and supporting the industry. But at the end of the day, it's we flesh and blood humans that really, make it all come alive. And that's what attracted me to the scene, not the gorgeous dresses coming down the runway, but people who were creating them, or the people that were strutting them, or the people that desired them and dreamed about them.
The word fearless gets used very often to describe you, and we've talked about your own journey in approaching things with fearlessness. But I have a question about that word, because I'm wondering if it means that you decide that you don't feel fear, or if it means that you know that there's going to be fear, and you decide not to let it stop you from doing what you want. Do you know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean, and I do. I think to just totally abolish fear, there's no such thing, and I'm never gonna. You do know it's kind of the like the demon lurking, at the back of the closet or something, and it could resurface. But I think you make a conscious decision. I mean, Viktor Frankl talked about that in his book Man's Search for Meaning, and how he got through the Holocaust, and how the one thing that nobody can take from you is your choice, your personal choice of attitude. And Dr. Edith Egar, another great Holocaust survivor, psychologist who wrote a brilliant book called The Choice, that's helped me so often thinking about that conscious decision that I'm just going to leave fear on the table. Like for my cancer journey, certainly, that was probably the scariest thing that I'd ever gone through. But I knew that fear wasn't going to get me anywhere. Fear is just all about worry, and worry is just a waste of the imagination. So really a matter of, taking control of your mind. I always say, if you can't change a situation, change your mind. It's not always that easy to change your mind, but it's something that you can work on, and it's something that we have control over. We really have to believe that. Otherwise we just become victims, and who wants to do that?
I think that's a perfect place to leave it. I want to thank you so, so much, Jeannie. I'll speak for everyone listening and say that I've just learned so much, and it's been an honor to talk to you. Thank you.
Oh, I listen, I've interviewed a lot of people in my day. I've been interviewed by quite a few, but Talia, you're just the best. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And everyone out there, listen to her music. It's so good. You're such a beautiful singer, songwriter. Just absolutely gorgeous. And I'm just honored. I never had the chance to really connect with you before, but I want to keep you around in my life from now on, baby.
Sounds good. You've all heard it here. So thank you so much. And really thank you to Robin for orchestrating this. And thank you all for being here. And
Yeah.
amazing Jewish women's organizations means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. It's just meant so much to be able to share so much with you.
So I now have the privilege to say thank you as well. And, so many thoughts running through my mind. I've learned so much, Jeannie. What your father taught you, don't be afraid and never give up. Personal choice is an attitude. Worry is just a waste of imagination. All those things really speak to, I think, why you are the resilient person that you are, in addition to all of your other incredible accomplishments. And so I just want to say, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your generosity of time, and for being so open with all of us and really inspiring us as we hear your stories. And Talia, to you, I want to say thank you for your beautiful, sensitive interview. Just so gifted, which I knew, and I feel really proud that I introduced the two of you to each other, because I see a friendship brewing here. So it's really an honor to have connected both of you. And on behalf of all of us, thank you. Happy Women's Day, everybody. And I just want to say one last piece before we end. And that is as part of this collective's work, we have another incredible program coming up. It's going to be in person. Jeannie and Talia, we'd love you to come as our guests. It's going to be taking place on Monday, May 12th at Holy Blossom Synagogue, and Rabbi Yael Splansky will be interviewing Justice Rosalie Abella in person live. And again, really looking at the power of women, the incredibly talented Jewish women that we have in our community. We're so blessed to have all of you, and thank you both. Hope everybody will join us. Stay tuned. We'll be promoting the events. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, everyone on this Zoom for joining. We'll reconvene. Jillian, thanks for being there.